She lost her job over a ham sandwich. That's what Sarah thought when her manager threw her out into the cold rain. All she did was give her own lunch to a shivering, homeless old man who looked like he hadn't eaten in days. She thought she would never see him again. She was wrong. Less than 24 hours later, the entire city block was shut down by black SUVs. Men in suits surrounded the diner, looking for the waitress who served the old boss. Sarah was terrified, thinking she was in trouble. But she didn't realize that the shivering old man wasn't a beggar. He was the father of Dante Moretti, the most feared Mafia don in the city, and nobody touches the don's family without paying a price. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall, it felt like it was trying to erase the city. It battered the neon sign of the Silver Spoon Diner, flickering ominously above 4th Street. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee, grease, and despair. Sarah Jenkins wiped the counter for the 100th time that hour. Her wrist ached. At 24, she felt 50. She glanced at the clock. 1:45 p.m. 15 minutes until her break. 15 minutes until she could eat the stale ham sandwich she had wrapped in a napkin in her locker. It was the only meal she would eat today. "Table 4 needs a refill, Sarah. Stop dreaming and move your feet." The voice grated on her ears like sandpaper. It was Rick, the manager. Rick was a short man with a shiny forehead and a soul darker than the espresso he overcharged for. He didn't just manage the diner. He ruled it like a petty tyrant. He knew Sora was desperate. He knew about her mother's hospital bills at St. Mary's, and he used that leverage every chance he got. "I'm on it, Rick," Sarah said, her voice quiet. She grabbed the coffee pot, forcing a smile onto her face as she walked toward table 4. The diner was mostly empty, save for a few regulars and a couple of businessmen arguing over a laptop. But as Sarah poured coffee, the front door chimed. A gust of cold, wet wind blew in, carrying with it a figure that made the entire room go silent. He was old. Not just elderly, but ancient, with skin like crumpled parchment paper. He wore a trench coat that was soaked through, stained with mud at the hem. His grey hair was plastered to his skull, and his hands shook violently as he gripped a wooden cane. He looked like a ghost that the storm had spat out. Rick slammed his hand on the counter. Oh, for crying out loud. Not another stray. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy in her chest. "Rick, it's pouring out there. Let him just sit for a minute." "This isn't a shelter, Sarah." "Paying customers only," Rick sneered, wiping his hands on his apron. "Watch. I'll have him out in 10 seconds. Rick marched out from behind the counter, his chest puffed out. Sarah watched in horror. She knew Rick's cruelty had no bottom, but kicking out a frail old man in a thunderstorm was a new low. The old man had barely taken 2 steps inside, his eyes scanning the room with a confused, hazy look. He didn't look like a drug addict. He looked lost. He looked like someone's grandfather who had taken a wrong turn 3 decades ago. "Hey, you!" Rick shouted, startling the old man. The man flinched, nearly losing his balance on the wet floor. "We don't want any trouble here, and we definitely don't want any loiterers. Turn around and walk back out." The old man's voice was a rasp, barely audible. I just need a glass of water. Please, I'm dizzy." "Water costs $1, and you don't look like you have $1. Rick spat. "Out, now. Before I call the cops." The old man's shoulders slumped. It was a posture of utter defeat. He turned slowly, his cane tapping a sad rhythm against the linoleum. Sarah couldn't watch it. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She thought of her own father, who had passed away 3 years ago, and how he would have felt if someone treated him like trash. The fear of losing her job was strong, but her humanity was stronger. "Stop!" Sarah shouted. The diner went silent. Rick spun around, his face turning a shade of purple. "Excuse me?" Sarah walked out from behind the counter. Her legs were shaking, but she kept her head high. She walked right past Rick and gently took the old man's arm. His coat was freezing cold. "He's a paying customer," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm paying for him." Rick's eyes narrowed into slits. "You? You can barely pay your rent, Sarah. Don't play hero." "Put it on my tab," Sarah said firmly. She guided the old man to the corner booth, the one near the heater. "Sit here, sir. Please, you're soaking wet." The old man looked at her, his eyes a piercing shade of blue that seemed startlingly sharp for a moment before fading back into exhaustion. "You don't have to do this, miss. The little man, he is angry." "He's always angry," Sarah whispered, grabbing a menu. "My name is Sarah, and you are not going back out in that rain until you're warm." She didn't know it yet, but that decision, that simple act of defiance, had just started a clock, a countdown that would end with either her salvation or her destruction. The old man introduced himself as Elias. He sat shivering in the booth, his hands wrapped around the mug of hot water Sarah had brought him. "Thank you, Sarah," Elias said, his voice gaining a little strength. "It has been a long time since someone looked at me and saw a person." Sarah smiled sadly. She glanced at the kitchen. Rick was pacing back and forth, glaring at her through the pass-through window. She knew she was in trouble. Serious trouble. "Are you hungry, Elias?" she asked. Elias looked down at the table. "I have no money, child. I lost my wallet. Or perhaps I forgot it. My memory. It is not what it used to be." "I didn't ask if you had money," Sarah said softly. "I asked if you were hungry." His stomach gave a loud growl, answering for him. He looked embarrassed, trying to cover the sound with a cough. Sarah stood up. "I'll be right back." She went to the back locker room. Her stomach twisted. She was starving. She hadn't eaten since breakfast the day before to save money for her mum's medication. In her bag was a ham and cheese sandwich. It wasn't much, just 2 slices of cheap white bread and a single slice of processed ham. But to her, it was a lifeline. She looked at the sandwich. Then she thought of Elias, shaking in the booth. "He needs it more," she told herself. She unwrapped the sandwich, put it on a clean plate, and added a handful of potato chips from the kitchen supply, something she would definitely get yelled at for if Rick saw. She carried the plate out to the booth. "Here," she said, placing it in front of him. "It's not a steak dinner, but it'll help." Elias stared at the sandwich as if it were gold. He looked up at Sarah, and for a second, his eyes watered. "This is your lunch, isn't it?" "I'm not hungry," Sarah lied. "Please eat." As Elias ate, he ate with a dignity that surprised her. He didn't wolf it down like a starving animal. He ate slowly, methodically. Between bites, he asked her questions. "Why do you work for that man?" Elias asked, gesturing to Rick. "I need the money," Sarah admitted, leaning against the booth. "My mum is sick. The bills are, well, they're a lot. I'm 2 months behind on rent. Rick is the only one who hired me without a background check on my credit." "You are a good daughter," Elias said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Loyalty to family. That is the most important thing in the world. More important than money. More important than power." "Tell that to the landlord," Sarah joked weakly. Elias reached into his wet coat pocket. He pulled out a small, strange object. It looked like an old poker chip, but it was made of heavy metal, black with a gold lion engraved on the center. "Take this," Elias said, sliding it across the table. "What is it?" "Collateral," Elias said mysteriously. I cannot pay you for the sandwich today. But keep this. If you are ever in a situation where you have nowhere to turn, show this to the right people." Sarah didn't want to take it, but he insisted. She slipped the heavy coin into her apron pocket. "Thank you, Elias. But you really didn't have to." Suddenly, a shadow fell over the table. "Break's over," Rick barked. He stood over the booth, a cruel smirk on his face. "And so is your employment." Sarah froze. "What?" "I told you. No loiterers. You defied a direct order," Rick said, his voice loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "You gave away company property. Those chips aren't free, Sarah. That's theft. You're fired." "Rick, please," Sarah begged, panic rising in her throat. "It was a handful of chips. I paid for the sandwich. I need this job." "Get your things and get out," Rick sneered. He turned to Elias. "And you got your free meal. Now beat it before I physically throw you out." Elias stood up slowly. He didn't look frail anymore. He stood up to his full height, which was surprisingly tall. He looked at Rick with a cold, dead stare that actually made the manager take a step back. "You are making a mistake," Elias said calmly. "Get out!" Rick screamed, pointing at the door. Sarah grabbed her purse from the back, tears streaming down her face. She had lost her job. She had no way to pay the rent. She walked to the door, shame burning her cheeks. Elias followed her out into the rain. "I am so sorry, Sarah," Elias said. The wind whipped his coat around him. "It's not your fault," Sarah sobbed, pulling her thin cardigan tight. I don't know what I'm going to do." "Go home," Elias said firmly. "Go to your mother. Everything will change tomorrow. I promise you." Sarah didn't believe him. She just nodded, turned, and ran toward the bus stop, crying into the rain. She didn't see the black sedan that pulled up to the curb the moment she left. She didn't see the two large men in suits jump out and hold an umbrella over Elias. She didn't hear the driver say, "Mr. Moretti, we've been looking everywhere for you. The Don is frantic." And she didn't hear Elias, the fragile old man, say in a voice of absolute command, "Get my son on the phone. We have business to discuss regarding this establishment." While Sarah was weeping on a plastic chair in the waiting room of St. Mary's Hospital, a very different scene was unfolding 5 miles away in the penthouse of the Obsidian Tower. The Obsidian Tower was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking Seattle. It was the headquarters of Moretti Global, a legitimate shipping empire that served as the perfect front for the Moretti family's underworld activities. Dante Moretti paced the marble floor of his office like a caged tiger. He was 32 years old, 6'3", with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the city's criminal underworld. He wore a 3-piece Italian suit that cost more than Sarah's entire life earnings. His face was handsome, but his eyes were terrifying, dark, calculating, and currently filled with a murderous panic. "Find him," Dante growled into his phone. "If my father isn't found in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to burn this city down until the ash chokes everyone in it." He hung up and threw the phone onto a velvet couch. "Dante," a calm voice came from the doorway. Dante spun around. Standing there, flanked by 2 large bodyguards, was Elias. He was dry now, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, holding a cup of hot tea. "Papa!" Dante rushed forward, his hard exterior cracking instantly. He grabbed his father by the shoulders, checking him for injuries. "Where were you? We lost your signal. The security team is terrified. I was about to execute the head of my detail." Elias waved a hand dismissively. "Stop it, Dante. You are too dramatic. I went for a walk." "A walk? In a storm? Without your medication?" Dante guided his father to a leather armchair. "You know your condition, Papa. The doctor said your memory comes and goes. You could have been hit by a car. You could have been mugged." I was almost mugged, Elias said softly, staring into the fire crackling in the fireplace. By the cold. By the indifference of people. Dante's expression hardened. He knelt beside the chair. "Did someone hurt you?" "Not physically," Elias said. He looked at his son. "I wandered far. I got confused. The streets looked the same. I found a diner. I was freezing, Dante. I felt my bones turning to ice. I walked inside to ask for water." Dante's jaw clenched. "And?" "The manager, a little man with eyes like a rat." "He threw me out," Elias said, his voice distant. "He called me a stray. He said I was trash. He was going to call the police." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dante stood up slowly. "He threw you out? Into the storm?" "He tried," Elias corrected. "But there was a girl. A waitress." Dante paused. "What did she do?" Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out the wrapper of the cheap ham sandwich. He smoothed it out on the mahogany table. "She stood between me and the manager. She risked her job. She bought me food with her own money. She gave me her lunch, Dante. She was starving, I could hear it. But she gave it to me." Elias looked up, his blue eyes sharp again. "She had nothing, and she gave me everything. And for that, the rat fired her." Dante stared at the wrapper. He touched the cheap plastic. A waitress. A nobody. Someone who had every reason to be bitter at the world had shown mercy to the former don of the Seattle Mafia, while a manager had treated him like garbage. "What was the name of the place?" Dante asked. His voice was dangerously quiet. "The Silver Spoon Diner, on 4th Street, Elias said. "Her name was Sarah. She has a sick mother. She was crying when she left, Dante. She was terrified of how she would pay her bills." Dante walked over to his desk and pressed the intercom button. "Enzo," he said. A moment later, a bald man with a scar running down his neck entered the room. Enzo was Dante's enforcer. "Yes, boss." "Prepare the convoy," Dante said, buttoning his suit jacket. "We are going to 4th Street." "Is there a problem, boss?" "No." Dante adjusted his cuffs, his eyes cold as steel. "We are simply going to conduct a performance review. And Enzo—" "Yes? Bring the lawyers, and bring a sledgehammer." The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets of Seattle gray and damp. Inside the Silver Spoon Diner, Rick was in a fantastic mood. He whistled as he wiped down the counter. The problem was gone. Sarah, with her sad eyes and constant requests for advance pay, was history. He had already put a "Help Wanted" sign in the window, and he was looking forward to hiring someone younger, maybe someone who wouldn't talk back when he told them to ignore the homeless. "Hey Rick, coffee's cold," a regular customer shouted from booth 3. "Coming, coming! Keep your shirt on," Rick yelled back, grinning. He felt powerful. He felt like the king of his little grease-stained kingdom. At 10 a.m., the sunlight streaming through the front window was suddenly blocked out. It wasn't a cloud. It was a wall of black metal. 4 Cadillac Escalades pulled up to the curb, parking directly in the no-parking zone. They moved with military precision. Rick paused, the coffee pot hovering in mid-air. "Who is that?" a customer whispered. "Is it the president?" The doors of the SUVs opened in unison. 6 men stepped out first. They were huge, wearing tailored suits that strained against their muscles. They wore earpieces and sunglasses, despite the lack of sun. They formed a perimeter around the diner door. Then, the back door of the lead car opened. Dante Moretti stepped out. He didn't look like a customer. He looked like he owned the oxygen everyone else was breathing. He adjusted his tie, checked his watch, and walked toward the diner door. Enzo followed him, carrying a black leather briefcase. The diner bell chimed as they entered, but nobody moved. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from casual breakfast to suffocating tension. Rick swallowed hard. He wiped his hands on his apron, his instincts telling him this wasn't a health inspector. Can I help you, gentlemen? Table for 8? Dante didn't answer. He didn't even look at Rick. He walked to the center of the room and looked around. He looked at the peeling paint, the sticky tables, the flickering lights. He looked at it with pure disgust. It smells like grease and mediocrity in here, Dante said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the silent room. Rick puffed out his chest, trying to muster some authority. Excuse me, sir. You can't just walk in here and insult my establishment. If you're not ordering, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Dante finally turned his eyes to Rick. It was like a wolf looking at a rabbit. You're Rick, Dante stated. It wasn't a question. Yeah, I'm Rick. I'm the manager here. Who are you? Dante walked slowly toward the counter. He placed his hands on the formica surface. My name is Dante Moretti. Does that name ring a bell, Rick? Rick's face went pale. Everyone in Seattle knew the name Moretti. They owned the docks. They owned the construction unions. They owned the politicians. Surely, Mr. Moretti, Rick stammered, sweat instantly beading on his forehead. To what do we owe the honor? A private event? I can clear the room. I'm looking for an employee, Dante said smoothly. A waitress. Name of Sarah. Rick blinked. Relief washed over him. Oh, she's in trouble, he thought. She probably owes them money. I knew she was bad news. Rick let out a nervous laugh. Oh, Sarah, you just missed her. Well, by a day. I fired her yesterday. Dante's expression didn't change. Is that so? Yeah, had to let her go, Rick said, gaining confidence, thinking he was bonding with the powerful man. Caught her stealing, giving away free food to bums. You know how it is, right? You run a business. You can't have employees stealing from you. She was a liability, always crying about her mum, always asking for handouts. Bad for the brand. Dante stared at Rick. The silence stretched for 5 agonizing seconds. Stealing, Dante repeated. Exactly. Gave a premium ham sandwich to some dirty old hobo who wandered in off the street. Smelled like a sewer, that guy. I told him to beat it, and she defied me. So I kicked them both out. Dante turned to Enzo. Enzo, did you hear that? I heard it, boss, Enzo rumbled. He kicked them both out, Dante said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming terrifyingly soft. He kicked out the dirty old hobo. Dante reached into his pocket and pulled out a photo. He slammed it onto the counter. It was a picture of Elias Moretti, dressed in a tuxedo at a gala. Is this the hobo, Rick? Dante roared. The shout was so sudden that Rick jumped back, knocking over a stack of cups. I don't... Rick squinted at the photo. It looks like him. But he was wearing rags. That hobo is Elias Moretti, Dante hissed, leaning over the counter, his face inches from Rick's. My father. The man who built half this city. The man who could buy this entire block with the change in his pocket. Rick's legs gave out. He gripped the counter to stop from falling. I didn't know. Mr. Moretti, please, I swear I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't look, Dante shouted. You saw an old man in need, and you saw trash. But Sarah, she saw a human being. Dante straightened up and buttoned his jacket. Enzo. The briefcase. Enzo slammed the briefcase onto the counter and opened it. Inside were stacks of legal documents. What is this? Rick squeaked. This is the deed to the building, Dante said calmly. And the lease agreement for the diner. We bought the building this morning, Rick, at 8 a.m. And at 8:15 a.m., we bought the debt of the diner's owner. Dante smiled, but it was a smile that promised pain. Technically, As of 45 minutes ago. I am your boss." Rick looked around wildly. The customers were watching, eyes wide. "Mr. Moretti, I can explain. I can make it up to you." "You can," Dante agreed. "First, you are fired. Obviously." "Please, I have a mortgage," Rick begged. "Second," Dante continued, ignoring him, "you are going to give me Sarah's address, right now. If you make me wait more than 30 seconds, Enzo is going to use you to test the structural integrity of that front window." Rick scrambled for the employee file box. His hands were shaking so badly, he dropped the box, papers flying everywhere. He fell to his knees, frantically searching through the papers. Here! Here! Rick held up a crumpled application form. "Sarah Jenkins, 402 East Oak Street, apartment 4B. That's all I have." Dante snatched the paper. He looked at the address, then back at Rick. "Get out of my diner," Dante said. "Sir, get out." Rick untied his apron and threw it down, running toward the door. "Wait," Dante called out. Rick froze near the door, hoping for mercy. "You forgot your check," Dante said. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a single penny, and flicked it at Rick. It hit Rick in the forehead and clattered to the floor. "Severance pay. Don't spend it all in one place." Rick fled into the street. Dante turned to the stunned customers. "Breakfast is on the house, but everyone needs to leave. We are closing for renovations." As the customers hurriedly gathered their things, Dante walked back to the SUV, looking at the address in his hand. "Enzo," Dante said, "go to the store. Buy everything. Food, furniture, clothes, everything a woman would need." "Where are we going, boss?" "To East Oak Street," Dante said, getting into the car. "We have a debt to pay, and the Morettis always pay their debts." East Oak Street was the part of the city the postcards didn't show. It was a row of crumbling brick tenements where the streetlights flickered and the potholes were deep enough to swallow a tire. Sarah sat on the edge of her sagging mattress in apartment 4B. The room was cold, the heater had broken 3 weeks ago, and the landlord, Mr. Henderson, had stopped answering her calls once she fell behind on rent. She held a letter in her shaking hands. It wasn't an eviction notice. She already had 3 of those taped to the front door. This was from St. Mary's Hospital. Final notice. Transfer of patient Martha Jenkins, scheduled for 12:00 p.m. today, due to outstanding balance of $48,000. They were going to move her mother. They were going to take her out of the private room with the specialized equipment she needed for her heart condition and dump her in a state-run facility where the nurse-to-patient ratio was 50-1. It was a death sentence. Sarah looked at the clock. 10:45 a.m. She had an hour to find a miracle. She stood up and walked to the kitchen. She opened the fridge. It contained a half-empty jug of water, a jar of mustard, and a single slice of bread. Her stomach cramped. She hadn't eaten since the chips she stole yesterday. She realized with a sinking heart that the sandwich she gave Elias was literally the last food she owned. At least he was warm, she thought, wiping a tear from her cheek. I did one good thing. Suddenly the building shook. It was a low, vibrating rumble that rattled the window panes. Sarah frowned. It sounded like a tank. She walked to the window and peered through the cracked blinds. Down on the street, the neighborhood had stopped. 4 massive black SUVs were idling in the middle of the road, blocking traffic in both directions. Men in suits were standing by the cars, scanning the rooftops. Neighbors were peeking out of their windows, terrified. "Police?" Sarah whispered. "Drug raid?" Then she saw him. The tall, dark-haired man in the suit who looked like a prince visiting a graveyard. He looked up at the building, his eyes seeming to lock directly onto her window on the 4th floor. Sarah backed away, her heart pounding. Did Rick call the cops? Did he say I stole money? She heard heavy footsteps on the stairs, not the shuffling of her neighbors, but the rhythmic, heavy tread of expensive leather shoes. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Knock, knock, knock. It was a polite knock, but it carried authority. Sarah grabbed a heavy brass candlestick, the only thing of value she had left from her grandmother, and crept to the door. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice trembling. "Miss Jenkins?" A deep, smooth voice answered. "My name is Dante. I need to speak with you." "I don't have the rent money," Sarah shouted through the wood. "Tell Mr. Henderson I get paid on Friday." "I am not the landlord," the voice said. "Please, Sarah, open the door. It's about Elias." Sarah froze. Elias? The old man. Is he okay? She unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain on. Through the gap she saw Dante Moretti. Up close, he was overwhelming. The scent of expensive cologne and tobacco drifted into her stale apartment. "Is he hurt?" Sarah asked immediately. "Is Elias okay?" Dante looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, the dark circles, the way her hand clutched her cardigan to hide her stained uniform. But mostly, he saw that her first concern was still for his father. "Elias is fine," Dante said gently. "May I come in?" Sarah hesitated, then undid the chain. The place is a mess. I wasn't expecting company." Dante stepped inside. Enzo followed him, filling the doorway like a bodyguard statue. Dante looked around. He saw the peeling wallpaper. He saw the bucket in the corner catching a leak from the ceiling. He walked to the kitchen table and saw the stack of medical bills. "Enzo," Dante said quietly. "Wait in the hall." Enzo nodded and closed the door, leaving them alone. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, putting the candlestick down. "You look important." "I am Elias's son," Dante lied smoothly. "He didn't mention he was the Don. He told me what you did yesterday. He told me you fed him when you were hungry yourself." Dante walked to the fridge. Before Sarah could stop him, he opened it. The light inside flickered over the empty wire racks. The single slice of bread sat there like a tombstone. Dante stared at it for a long time. His hands curled into fists at his sides. He felt a rage burning in his chest, not at her, but at a world that would let a woman like this starve while men like Rick sat fat and happy. "You gave him your lunch," Dante said, his voice thick with emotion. "And this is all you had?" "I'm fine," Sarah said quickly, her pride flaring up. "I was going to go grocery shopping later." "With what money?" Dante turned to face her. "You lost your job, Sarah." Sarah looked down. "I'll find another one. I'm a hard worker." "You shouldn't have to be," Dante said. He walked over to her. He towered over her, but his posture was submissive, respectful. "My father. He can be difficult, but he is everything to me. You saved him from the cold. You saved him from humiliation. You possess a kind of nobility that cannot be bought." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. "No," Sarah backed away. "I didn't do it for a reward. Please, I don't want charity." Dante paused. He realized she was serious. She would starve before she took a handout. "It's not charity," Dante said, putting the checkbook away. "It's a business transaction. You have something I need." "What could I possibly have that you need?" "Time," Dante said. He glanced at the letter from the hospital on the bed. He could read the bold red letters from where he stood. "You need to go to St. Mary's, right now. Your mother is being transferred." Sarah gasped. "How did you?" "I know a lot of things," Dante said. "My car is downstairs. Let me drive you. If we don't leave now, you won't make it before the transfer order goes through." Sarah looked at the clock. 11:15 a.m. She had no choice. The bus would take 40 minutes. "Okay," she whispered. "Take me to my mum." The ride to the hospital was a blur. Sarah sat in the back of the Escalade, sinking into leather seats that were softer than her bed. Dante sat across from her, working on his phone, barking silent orders via text. When they pulled up to the emergency entrance of St. Mary's, Dante didn't wait for the driver. He kicked the door open and stepped out, offering a hand to Sarah. "Stay close to me," he said. They walked into the lobby. It was chaotic, but as Dante moved through the crowd, people instinctively parted ways. It was an aura of power that cleared a path. Sarah ran to the front desk. "Martha Jenkins, room 304. Is she still there?" The nurse typed on her computer. Jenkins. Oh, I'm sorry. Transport just went up. They are moving her to the County General ward. You can catch them at the elevators." "No!" Sarah screamed. She bolted toward the elevators. Dante was right behind her. They reached the 3rd floor, just as the elevator doors were opening. A gurney was being wheeled out by 2 orderlies. On it lay a frail woman, pale and hooked up to an IV monitor. "Mom!" Sarah cried, rushing forward. She grabbed the metal railing of the bed. "Mom, you need to step back," one of the orderlies said, pushing Sarah away. "We have orders to transport." "She can't be moved," Sarah sobbed. "Her heart is too weak." "Talk to administration," the orderly said, trying to push the gurney past her. "Stop!" a voice commanded. Dante stepped out of the elevator. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. He placed one hand on the front of the gurney. The orderly pushed, but the gurney didn't move. It was like hitting a wall. "Hey, buddy, let go!" the orderly snapped. "Who do you think you are?" "Where is the administrator?" Dante asked calmly. "I'm right here," a nasally voice said. A man in a cheap grey suit walked out of an office down the hall. His badge read, "Administrator Higgins." He looked annoyed. "What is the meaning of this delay? This patient is non-paying. We need that bed for a Gold Plan member arriving in 20 minutes. Higgins looked at Sarah with disdain. "Miss Jenkins, we discussed this. No money, no private room. This isn't a hotel." Sarah gripped her mother's hand. Martha's eyes were fluttering open, filled with fear. "Please, Mr. Higgins, just one more week. I'll get the money." "You've said that for 2 months," Higgins sneered. "Boys, move the patient. If she resists, call security." The orderlies grabbed the gurney again. "If you touch that bed again," Dante said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "you will never use your hands again." Higgins laughed. "Is this a threat? Do you know who runs this hospital? The board of directors will have you arrested." Dante reached into his inner pocket. Higgins flinched, perhaps expecting a gun, but Dante pulled out a phone. He pressed a single button and put it on speaker. "Mr. Moretti?" A voice crackled on the line. It was deep and terrified. "Chairman Davis," Dante said, staring directly at Higgins. "I am standing on the 3rd floor of St. Mary's. I'm looking at an administrator named Higgins. He is trying to evict a woman named Martha Jenkins." Higgins's face went white. He recognized the name Chairman Davis. That was the head of the hospital board. Mr. Moretti?" Higgins stammered. "I didn't know you were." "Chairman," Dante continued, "I am currently looking at the donor plaque on the wall. I see a lot of empty space. I am prepared to make a donation of $5 million to the cardiac wing today." Sarah gasped. The hallway went silent. $5 million? Chairman Davis choked on the phone. "Mr. Moretti, that would be generous beyond words." "However," Dante said, his eyes drilling into Higgins, "I have one condition. The donation is contingent on Martha Jenkins receiving the best care this hospital offers, indefinitely, and it is also contingent on the immediate termination of Administrator Higgins." "Done!" Chairman Davis shouted immediately. "Higgins, you're fired. Get out of my hospital. Higgins dropped his clipboard. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. Dante hung up the phone. He looked at the orderlies. "Take Mrs. Jenkins back to her room and get Dr. Reeves, the chief of surgery, down here. She needs a bypass, and she is getting it today." The orderlies scrambled, wheeling Martha back into the safety of room 304 with panicked speed. Sarah stood frozen in the hallway. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her knees weak. She looked at Dante. This wasn't just a rich man. This was a king. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Really?" Before Dante could answer, the elevator dinged again. Elias walked out. He looked nothing like the homeless man from yesterday. He wore a tuxedo, a silk scarf, and carried an ivory-handled cane. He looked like royalty. He walked straight to Sarah. He took her rough, work-worn hands in his own. "You asked who he is," Elias said, smiling warmly. "He is my son. I am Elias Moretti. And you, my dear Sarah, you are the only person in this city who treated me like a human being when I had nothing to offer you." Sarah looked from Elias to Dante. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The Moretti family, the Mafia. She should have been terrified. But looking at Elias's kind eyes and Dante's protective stance, she didn't feel fear. For the first time in years, she felt safe. "Why?" Sarah asked, tears spilling over. "Why do all this for a sandwich?" Elias squeezed her hands. "Because, Sarah, in a world full of wolves, you were the only one who stopped to feed a sheep. And the wolves—" Elias looked at Dante, who gave a rare, genuine smile. "The wolves protect their own." The clock on the wall of the VIP waiting room ticked with the rhythm of a slow-motion nightmare. It had been 5 hours since Martha was wheeled into surgery. Sarah sat by the window, watching the rain streak against the glass, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She expected the Morettis to leave. Important men like them didn't wait in hospitals. They had empires to run, enemies to silence, money to make. But they stayed. Elias sat in a leather armchair, reading a book of poetry, his presence calming and steady. Dante, however, was a force of restless energy. He paced the hallway, taking calls in hushed, aggressive Italian, ensuring that every specialist in the state was on standby. "Drink this," a voice said. Sarah looked up. Dante was holding a cup of steaming hot chocolate. "I don't drink coffee," he said, sitting down opposite her. "I remembered you said it makes you jittery." Sarah took the cup, her fingers brushing against his. He was warm. "Why are you doing this, Dante?" "Really?" "A sandwich is a kind gesture, but this is heart surgery. This is millions of dollars. It doesn't balance out." Dante leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The mask of the cold Mafia Don slipped for just a second. "My mother died in a public ward," Dante said quietly. "I was 12. We had no money then. I watched doctors ignore her because we couldn't pay the bribe. I swore that day that if I ever had the power, no one I cared about would ever wait for a doctor again." Sarah's breath hitched. "And you care about us?" "I care about people who have honor," Dante said intensely. "You saved my father. In my world, Sarah, loyalty is the only currency that matters. You are rich in it. You just didn't know it." Before Sarah could answer, the double doors swung open. Dr. Reeves stepped out, pulling off his surgical cap. He looked exhausted, but the grim expression was gone. "It's over," Dr. Reeves said. And it was perfect. Her heart is beating stronger than it has in 10 years. She's going to be fine, Sarah. Sarah let out a cry that was half laugh, half sob. She buried her face in her hands. She felt Elias's hand on her shoulder and saw Dante close his eyes and exhale a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. 2 days later, the sun finally broke through the Seattle clouds. Sarah was packing her few belongings in the hospital room while her mother slept peacefully. "Leave the bag," Dante said from the doorway. Sarah turned. "I'm just getting ready for discharge. I need to figure out where we're going to go. The landlord changed the locks on the apartment yesterday." "You aren't going back to East Oak Street," Dante said firmly. He walked into the room and placed a heavy, leather-bound portfolio on the tray table. "We need to discuss your new position." "I told you, I can't be your maid or your cook," Sarah said, her pride flaring up. "I appreciate everything, but I need to make my own way." "Open it." Sarah hesitated, then flipped the folder open. It was a deed. But not just a deed. It was a transfer of ownership for the building on 4th Street. And underneath it was a bank account in her name with a starting balance of $250,000. "Operating capital," Dante explained before she could scream, "for renovations, staff, and supplies." "You're giving me the diner?" Sarah whispered. "Rick's diner?" "No," Elias said, stepping into the room with a mischievous smile. "Rick's diner was a dump. We are giving you the building. What you put inside it is up to you. But I suggest you burn the old furniture. It had bad energy." "I can't accept this," Sarah said, pushing the folder back. "This is too much. I'm just a waitress. I don't know how to run a business." "You ran that floor better than Rick ever did," Dante countered. "I saw the way you worked. I saw the way you managed the chaos. You have the instinct. You just never had the opportunity." He stepped closer, his voice dropping low, intimate. "Don't insult me by refusing, Sarah. I fired Rick. I evicted the tenant. If you don't take it, the building sits empty. Do you want that?" Sarah looked at the deed. She thought of Rick's sneer. She thought of the years of scraping by. Then she looked at her mother, sleeping soundly in a bed that cost more per night than Sarah used to make in a year. "I'll take it," Sarah said, her voice trembling but strong. "But it's a loan. I will pay you back every cent." "With interest?" Dante smiled, a slow, dangerous, devastatingly handsome smile. "I prefer a different kind of interest." "Oh," Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Dinner, once a week, at the best table, and you have to sit with us. No apron, no serving, just us." Sarah felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Deal. The transformation. The next 3 months were the hardest of Sarah's life, but also the best. She didn't just reopen the diner, she exorcised it. She hired a crew to rip out the greasy linoleum and replace it with warm, polished oak. She tore down the flickering neon signs and replaced them with soft, amber pendant lights. She fired the cook who used to smoke over the grill and hired a young culinary student who had passion but needed a break, just like she had. She renamed it the Golden Lion, a tribute to the coin Elias had given her. Every day, black SUVs would park outside. Sometimes it was Enzo, dropping off supplies that fell off a truck, which Sarah politely refused, insisting on paying vendors. Sometimes it was Elias, sitting on a bucket in the middle of the construction zone, critiquing the paint color. And every night, Dante would stop by. He never stayed long, just enough to check the security, inspect the progress, and bring Sarah dinner from the finest Italian restaurants in the city, because she was too busy to eat. The tension between them grew, a slow burn that was hotter than the new industrial ovens in the kitchen. The grand reopening anniversary of the Golden Lion was the event of the season. The rain fell softly on the pavement outside, but inside, the restaurant was a sanctuary of golden light and laughter. The air smelled of rosemary, garlic, and fresh-baked bread. There was a 3-week waiting list to get a table. Sarah stood at the host station, She wore a tailored emerald dress that hugged her frame, her hair pinned up in an elegant chignon. She wasn't the tired, scared girl in the cardigan anymore. She was a CEO. She was a savior. "Table 4 is cleared, Sarah," a waitress said, "and the VIPs are here." The door opened. The room didn't go silent out of fear anymore. It went silent out of respect. Dante Moretti walked in. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He walked straight to Sarah, ignoring the local politicians and celebrities trying to catch his eye. "You look—" Dante paused, his eyes sweeping over her. "Expensive." Sarah laughed. "I had a good investor." "Happy anniversary, Sarah," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I know we agreed on paying back the loan, but I think we can renegotiate the terms of the partnership." He opened the box. It wasn't a ring, not yet, but a diamond necklace with a small lion pendant. Sarah let him clasp it around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. "Is this a business bonus?" she whispered. "No," Dante murmured in her ear. "This is personal." They walked to their booth in the corner, where Elias was already holding court with Martha, both of them laughing over a bottle of vintage red wine. Outside, across the wet street, a man stood in the shadows. Rick pulled his thin, sodden jacket tighter around himself. He had been watching for an hour. He watched the limousines pull up. He watched the happy customers. He watched Sarah, the girl he had fired for a ham sandwich, being treated like a queen by the most powerful man in Seattle. Rick looked down at his own hands, rough and cold from his job at the car wash. He had lost his diner. He had lost his reputation. And tonight, he had spent his last $10 on a lottery ticket that turned out to be a loser. He looked through the window one last time. He saw Sarah throw her head back and laugh at something Dante said. He saw the warmth. He saw the life he could have been part of if he had just shown an ounce of mercy. Rick turned away, the bitter taste of regret filling his mouth. He walked into the dark, rainy night, disappearing into the city that had forgotten him. Inside, Sarah raised her glass. "To the storm," she said softly. Dante clinked his glass against hers, his eyes promising a future full of storms they would weather together. "And to the shelter." From a single act of kindness in a storm to the owner of her own empire, Sarah proved that true power isn't about money, it's about heart. She lost a minimum-wage job but gained a family, a fortune, and a love that most people only dream of. Meanwhile, Rick learned the hard way that when you treat people like trash, you eventually end up in the dumpster yourself. What do you think? Did Rick deserve a harsher punishment, or is living with his regret the ultimate revenge? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and romance, please smash that like button. It helps us bring you more long-form stories. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have a new story coming next week about a billionaire who poses as a janitor to find a wife. You won't want to miss it.